introduce the topic that you have selected?
Absolutely, absolutely. Since I know so much about the topic, huh?
I think we all do.
Right. Today we're talking about adaptability and why adaptability is so important and why you need it. So the title in itself is just adaptability. So we're going to explore different areas of adaptability. And so that being said, since I came up with the topic, I'll get started. I recently did a post. I recently did a post on my LinkedIn account talking about adaptability being part of leadership. And for most people who have been following me for any length of time, they know for me, leadership, when I speak of leadership, it's not spoken of in a sense of an organization. It's spoken from a space of being leaders in our own lives, first and foremost. Leadership starts at home. And so that just kind of some background about when I mention leadership, that's the space I'm coming from. So adaptability is a huge piece. You might say, well, how huge is it, Curtis? Well, it's big. It's big. Trust me, it's big. But any event, adaptability is a major part of leadership. And oftentimes, I think that if we are looking at leadership, we know that adaptability and some don't necessarily break up leadership in so many different components, but in fact, there are a lot of parts that make up leadership. But I think it's important for us to make sure that we're not focusing on one part of leadership, or whether it be adaptability, whether it be other strengths or other areas, whether it be accountability. All things are part of leadership, and they're just definitely important. But in a sense of adaptability, adaptability is going to be, I would even say, similar to resilience. What do you think, Helen? Similar to resilience, adaptability, but I think with adaptability, we know that times are changing. We know that I don't necessarily believe that leadership styles change. I think leadership covers principles, and I think that I don't see the principles changing. I think that we may apply them differently, but I think that overall the leadership and its principles, they don't change, but the application does. So with adaptability, I think that, again, it's a major part of our leadership, but we also understand adaptability that that things are just going to change. People are going to change their mind. We're going to change our mind. We have to be mindful that in our adaptability, we're not sometimes, as far as leaders, we can empathize with someone, but then sometimes in our need to be understood or to understand other, sometimes we may go too far in our adaptability. So what's your take on that, Helen?
So there's a lot of thoughts going through my head, but before I even jump into that, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Because I would like you to explore a little bit more, because you just said people going too far with their adaptability. So can you share just a little bit more thoughts in regards to that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that with adaptability, the need for us as people, as leaders, sometimes is to understand and to be understood. And I think sometimes as we empathize with people, and the empathy is wonderful, but I think that sometimes in our empathizing with people, or at least our need to adapt to situations and to things that people are going through as leaders, it's not necessarily always just a challenge that we're facing, but oftentimes the challenges that we're facing, either they're coming from us, or that we're dealing with, either they're coming from us or they're coming from people. People present challenges, not necessarily that they say, well, here's a challenge for you, but just that their thought processes that people come up with, or that make people who they are. They bring challenges for us. And I think that, and our need to understand people, that adaptability for us as leaders, we can extend it too far, and we can go too far in regards to maybe even just kind of giving the company away, or just, so to speak, and just be too lenient sometimes. I think that even as a leader, we absolutely have to have boundaries. And I think sometimes we can let those boundaries down, or those walls down, in order, in a sense of being adaptable, if you will, if that makes any sense.
No, it completely does. So if I can just kind of like relay back what I heard within that, what I heard within that is people potentially misusing empathy, to the point where they're excusing people from actually making necessary changes, or excusing them from taking responsibility for whatever their part in this dynamic may be.
Right.
So it becomes to that point where it's enabling. It's
Mhm.
like you're so empathetic to their plight or whatever they have going on that you're not really holding them accountable for the change that needs to take place.
Right. Yeah. I think you're
Gotcha.
spot on. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, I completely agree, with where you're at with that in terms of the misuse of it or the overuse or however you worded it. I'm sorry. But I think of adaptability, and the word pivot just keeps coming
Mm. Yeah.
into my head. When you see that football player on the field, and his intention is
Right.
to run in this direction, but somebody's coming at him, so now he's got to pivot.
Yeah.
He's got to go. He's got to adapt very quickly to the circumstances that are currently being
Mm.
presented to him. And I think that's so applicable to life, because we often have goals that we have for ourselves or those around us, and we have an expectancy of how we're going to get from A to B. And very few times in life does that remain a straight line.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You always have different things that are thrown at you that are completely out of your control. And then sometimes things are within your control, but it's just not what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think adaptability is something we all absolutely need to not only be aware of and expect, but have an awareness of how to do it within ourselves. Because how I adapt to something may not look the same way that you adapt to something. And it doesn't mean that one of us is wrong. It just means that something different works for us.
It's interesting because I think that life, and I love what you said, because there definitely where one person can adapt to one situation, or another person may not adapt to that situation in the same fashion. But I think life in itself, it forces us to adapt. We may use certain words, certain language, or we may not want to, but I think it somewhere along the line, it forces us to adapt. And we can call it growth. And I think the interesting about growth is that either you are aware that you're growing and you're going to go with the process, or or the opposite is true, is that you don't want to grow and you're forced to go with the process, and the process forces you to adapt, if you will, and that's just part of the process, life. And we can find ourselves being angry about having to leave our position, because this is where we're most comfortable at, or perhaps things have changed in the job, the way things maybe may have gone in a certain job, or the way your spouse or your long-term partner, or maybe your kids are acting out in a certain way. So as parents, we have to adapt. And I know, Helen, you specialize in parenting, and so I think that adaptability is a huge component of being a parent.
Absolutely. I mean, you saying that, and it just kind of reminded me of this one particular incident with my boys. And is when I only had my first two. They're really young. I believe they're like 2 and 4. And I had set up this schedule that we were going to go take these nice little family pictures.
Right.
And it was one of those places where they like dress you up like you're in the 1920s,
Right. Right. Right.
that sort of thing. And, I had to put money down to reserve, our spot and all this other
Right.
kind of
Right.
stuff. And I'm trying to get, us ready so we can get out the door and, go take these pictures and be on time. And I have no idea what exactly was running through my mind. I told them they're 2 and 4, and I told them that they
Yeah.
could go play in the backyard while I finished changing my clothes. And so
Oh.
I don't know why I told them they could play in the backyard. But I get dressed, I go back, and what are my children doing? They are having the most wonderful time of their life playing in the mud.
Oh, now how from the time that you found them playing in the mud after you had gotten dressed, what was the time frame in where
Time
you had to?
frame.
Hmm?
So from the time I caught them playing in the mud, we only had like 20 minutes to get from the house to the place to be on time for our reservations.
Wow.
And it was one of those moments where I was like, we're not going to make it. And I can be as mad as I want to be. It's still not going to change the fact we're not going to make it. And
Wow.
I can rush them and I can pull them out of the mud and I can rinse them off
Right.
and I can do all this stuff and hope that, if I arrive late, they'll, have mercy on me and
Right.
take us
Right. Right.
anyway. I could do that. But by the time I finish doing all of that, none of us are going to be happy to
Right. Right.
take
Right.
these
Right.
pictures.
Right.
So that was definitely an adapting moment to
Sure.
where I had to release my dream for that moment.
Mm,
I had to let go of what I wanted in that moment. And
yeah.
instead of trying to go somewhere and have these pictures so that we can have this memory of looking back on, oh, look at these pictures. I chose to stay in that moment and make a
Mm,
different memory. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Isn't it interesting too how when we take pictures, at different times in life, where is it you can look at those pictures or look back at those pictures and just say, "Man, look at all the stuff I have gone through or went through up to this point where these pictures were smiling as if nothing had gone on. This is just a perfect moment. We seized the perfect moment, and life was just good at this moment. But not to mention all the stuff that had taken place prior to getting to taking those pictures, or whether you're again with your spouse or kids or significant other. But this is interesting because this adaptability makes me think about. I think we talked last week. About or
managing disappointments.
managing disappointments last week, but then we also mentioned the outcomes, not being stuck to the outcomes, and so it makes me think about
Right.
this adaptability, similar to what you just mentioned, how you had an idea that you're going to take your boys having a good time, and perhaps they'll even enjoy the pictures, and maybe the pictures were just for you because at 2 and 4, they're probably not really, thinking so much about, oh, mom's going to take pictures and we're going to really enjoy them. But
Not at all.
right, right, absolutely. So, and I think this adaptability, it's not easy, and I think with the parenting thing, that one episode that we did a little while ago, that you were just kind of completely carrying me about the parenting episode that we did.
It's okay. It's
But
okay.
that adaptability is huge because we talk about marrying myself to outcomes. My son, even just today, and I had to really kind of hold back because I call myself giving up some kind of anonymity in regards to just doing his own thing, and he's autistic, and so. Um, there's some, a lot of things he can do by himself, and he's fine with that. So, but there are other things where I'm just like, oh, well, Braden, I share with him over and over, different times. And next, I say, here you go, set him off to himself and let him do his thing. And trying to place where I can trust him. Well, Braden, did you close the window? Did you brush your teeth? And he'll look me dead in the eye and say, yes. And I say, okay, great. So I'm going on with the next thing, just as we do as parents, and find out that the opposite has been true, or he's been out of something for lotion for maybe even several days, perhaps. But yet when I look at the bottle's empty. He hasn't said, well, Curtis, I need lotion. And so for me to adapt to that, I'm still having challenges with that one. So, but that's what we're talking about, adaptability. So,
Okay, I hear you completely.
yeah,
And I don't know how people want to judge this when they hear it, but
yeah. Help me out, coach. Help me out, coach.
I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old at
Yeah.
home, and similar things. Like I
Hmm.
will tell them, okay, you have to go wash your hands. And they'll go in the bathroom and I'll hear the water running.
Yeah.
And then like later on, I'll go in the bathroom. There's no soap. I'm
Yeah.
just
Mm.
like,
Okay.
why didn't you say, hey, I want to wash my hands, but there's no soap in here. Where's the soap at, Mom? Like they don't say things like that. So I know you mentioned it as, okay, this is your autistic son. And I'm looking at it as this is just children's behavior,
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
I appreciate that. No, I seriously, I appreciate that because that has just been one of the challenges. But I appreciate you saying that because that's what I was thinking too. This is just children, but then at the same time, I'm just in my mind trying to instill them some kind of responsibility, some kind of anonymity where I'm not watching over him all the time. But then when he falls short, or at least I feel like he's falling short, I'm really bothered by that because, as a parent, who wants their child going to school where they're ashy and no lotion on their body or just haven't put deodorant or come home smelling like 6 men, or something, no parent wants that. And so that part bothers me a little bit. So I need some help in that area, but nevertheless.
No, like this is fine because it's going to lead into the next thing that I wrote down on my notes.
Mhm.
But there's an aspect of what you're talking about in which parents have to let go
Yeah.
of their expectancy. And this is a
Mhm.
part of the adaptability because you have this idea that this is what my
Sure.
kid is going to do. And this is how it's going to look when my kid does it. And then when your child doesn't do those things, you have to adapt. You have to be
Absolutely.
able to pivot accordingly. And that kind of brings me into modeling. Like
Mm.
what you're talking about is how is a parent then going to model the appropriate way for your child to handle these things,
Mhm.
rather than, if you go off and you're upset and you're yelling and whatever else, well, then
Mhm.
your child is going to learn whenever
Mhm.
you're met with disappointment, this is how you behave.
Mhm.
Um, you have to be able to model the appropriate way to handle
Right.
this. And as far as like, hey, if my kids go off and they don't have lotion on and now they're ashy all day, I'm like, that's their natural consequence. I don't need to do
Yeah.
anything else because that's your natural consequence. And depending on who you go to school with, you might hear it all day long, about how ashy your ankles or your knees or your elbows.
Right.
and
Right.
that can
Right.
and that can be all the reinforcement that your child needs to go home and make sure they put lotion on.
Mm. Okay. That's
And the same thing like with deodorant, because my 14-year-old, oh Jesus help him.
yeah. Yeah.
Because I instantly know if he didn't put deodorant on.
What's that word? Instantly.
Yes, instantly. I walk into the room. Did you put deodorant on? And he's 14, so he's at the age where he wants to
Sure.
look cute. He wants to, hang out with people and impress people and all that kind of stuff. And if he doesn't put deodorant on and he goes to school or he goes out with people and that's his situation, he's going to hear about it.
I need to take that up, Helen. I need to take what you're doing right there. I need to practice that because I think, yeah, for me, this adaptability, this is a good conversation because, yeah, I have had problems with it, man, because of my own outcomes. What I'm expecting for him to model a certain, yeah, that's a good word too, model a certain behavior, and when he doesn't, uh, yeah, I'm not at my best at that time because I think that in my own mind I'm just like, well, I've told him several times how important it is, and yeah, yeah,
Right. So I just look at it differently. That's all. I just
yeah,
look
yeah,
at it differently. And my thing is, hey, my job is to protect, provide, and guide.
Yeah.
And so I gave you the guidance. What
Mm-hmm.
you choose to do with that is 100% on you. It's not
Right.
my job to shove the guidance down your throat.
Gotcha.
It's not my job to,
Mm.
put you physically in a certain place and doing certain things. Mm-mm. If you are going to be a functioning adult, then you have to be able to govern yourself. You have to
Okay.
be able to tell yourself, oh, this is what I need to do. Here's where I need to go. Here's how I need to do it when I get there. Like,
Mhm.
you have to be able to do that for yourself.
Right.
So if you choose not to, yes, there can absolutely be natural consequences
Mhm.
to it,
Sure.
but sometimes there may be other consequences. Because here's where I introduce, and I've always said this to my
Mm.
freedom comes at the cost of responsibility.
Hmm. What's that?
So every time you want freedom to do whatever, I don't care if you just want to go in the kitchen and make your own, lunch or whatever. That's an aspect of freedom. So
Sure.
that comes with the responsibility that you need to clean up your mess then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So however you want to gauge, that situation of freedom. Hey, I don't want you constantly over my shoulder watching me,
Right.
pointing out every mistake that I make. Okay. Well, that comes at responsibility.
Absolutely.
You have to show me that you are willing and able to follow through with the responsibility that I told you I'm expecting from you. And if
Right.
you can't do that, then there's a loss of freedom.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I think that I'm definitely going to adopt what you're saying here because I think in turn it it will probably reduce my stress as well and just as you said earlier, just moments ago, let go. Just let go and let him deal with that. The consequences of whatever he's not doing. So yeah, I will definitely take that up. So. Yeah. So, yeah, with this adaptability, as you all are listening, or who will listen to replay, know that adaptability is obviously it goes with parenting. It goes with relationships as a whole. So as you're, dealing with your children, as you're dealing with your spouse, significant other, people on your job, colleagues, as you're a leader, the adaptability part is it can be freeing as Helen had just kind of mentioned to me, learning how to let go. So it can absolutely free us in regards to just lessening the burden or the stuff that we're having to carry as leaders, and just being okay with allowing even our team members as a leader to know that, hey, this is your responsibility, and I'm not going to step in until I need to step in. And if you're slacking in an area where I've already told you 2 or 3 times, uh, I get to do that because you're not up to speed to where you need to be at. So this definitely adaptability definitely applies to us as leaders, not only in the home but also within our organization. So again, we can definitely lessen the burden that we're carrying, because even as I'm listening to Helen right now, I can just find myself really just feeling like a freeing right now, knowing that, hey, you know what, I need to let go, and that's exactly what I will do. And again, it applies as leaders within our organization as well.
Absolutely. I think, well, it just kind of reminds me of an aspect of a webinar I did probably a couple of months ago, that providing people with choice and the freedom to make those choices is an act of love,
Yeah.
because essentially you're extending trust. You're extending this opportunity to say, hey, I believe in you, and I believe that deep down you want to be successful and you want to accomplish certain things, and that you can understand the
Mhm.
value that I'm trying to communicate with you in
Yeah.
regards to you doing certain things. And again, this is applicable not just for parenting, but in whatever leadership role a person may be in, of being able to say, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to step back and I'm going to allow you to choose how you're going to accomplish this thing, and that is such a relationship builder, for
Yeah,
people to be in that role. And because letting go is an aspect of adapting,
absolutely.
because when you first have people, you're doing a lot of hand holding, whether it's parent and child, that you have this child that's 100% dependent on you. So you're doing everything, or even in a workplace where you do have to show people, okay, well, here's how we do this, and here's where you can find that, and here's who you go to. Like, you have to do a whole lot of hand holding, but at some point in time, you do have to adapt, and
Right.
you have to see that people have built up certain levels of abilities and capabilities, that, okay, it's time to pull back. I don't need to be that same person. I don't need to
Mm,
be in that same role, so that this other person can grow and they can find their own way.
right. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome, Helen, because I think with this adaptability piece of it, one thing I'm learning right now, just as we're speaking right now, is that how how freeing it is, the freedom that comes from it. And I think that when we can allow others to make mistakes, allow others to uh, I guess, challenge us, because they will. They will. Whether you're a parent or within your organization, people are going to challenge us, and it is up to us to adapt, and in a way that we're not we're not allowing other people to run us over, if you will, or even to allow ourselves to be used as a doormat. And I mentioned earlier about the boundaries. I think that sometimes with the adaptability, uh, uh, it is absolutely important, but we can also, in our need to maybe quiet a situation, or just kind of just silence something, or you just kind of push it, place it under the rug or something, we can find ourselves as just maybe over adapting, if you will. And I think in some cases you can possibly find yourself in a much bigger situation, because life in life, you just have to have boundaries, and you just have to know how far you're willing to go, or how far you're willing to adapt to something. And I think even with adapting, there has to be some boundaries as well. There's some things that are just not going to be acceptable. As a colleague, or even with our kids, they could be dealing with X, Y, Z. And though, as Helen mentioned, we can give them choices, but there are certain things that we just cannot accept in their behavior.
Absolutely.
So,
No, absolutely. I'm right there with you in terms like boundary. And I just kind of want to add, oftentimes what I see when people are struggling to set those boundaries, they're struggling to adapt in various situations.
mm,
Anxiety is playing a role.
yeah,
They have
absolutely.
anxiety about, what to do, how to do it. If they want to do it, they don't want to do it.
Right,
Like, are feeling so set on, okay, here's the path that I'm going to take, and this path is going to take me exactly to this outcome. And then when that doesn't happen, they're completely frazzled, and they're in a state of anxiety, which then prevents them from being able to think clearly and to like process their way through. Oh,
mhm,
okay, I just have to pivot. Like, they're not even in that place of thinking about pivoting. They're just in a place of panic. Like, oh
right,
my
right,
gosh, it didn't
right.
happen that way. So I think being able to manage that anxiety is definitely a piece of adaptability, especially when
Mm,
things happen that are so far from what you wanted or you were expecting or where you thought you were going to be. Um, you have to be able to manage that anxiety, and you have to be able to breathe and, just kind of come back to a place of calm and relaxation for yourself, so
mm,
that you can think about, all right, what are my options now? What can I do with this? How do I want to handle this? I think it's important for people to stay mindful of, well, who do they want to be in handling this situation? Do you want to be that frazzled, out of control type of
Mm.
person? Do you want to be the person who is taking on that leadership role of, okay, it's all right, we're going to get through this? Like, I think people need to be mindful of how
Right,
they
right.
want to show up.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I love what you said in regards to that anxiety that potentially is there, and in the space of adaptability, because it is very true, a very true thing. Because I think that uh, we can oftentimes, as we've kind of been speaking on earlier, is that we can oftentimes be married to the outcome. And because we're married to the outcome, and when you have something completely different seemingly coming from the left field, uh, you didn't measure for that. You didn't account for that thing coming from the left field, the right field, or whatever, or out of space. You just did not account for that thing or things. And so when life presents it to you, or people present things to you, or with attitudes, as I mentioned with kids, or earlier, as the parenting piece, or with our colleagues as a leader, with your subordinates, we can be married to an outcome, but then, as Helen mentioned, this anxiety comes up because we are married to that outcome, and it can become difficult to adapt right away. And I love what you said about the breathing piece of it, because I think that anxiety space that potentially people are dealing with in so many different arenas, is that it does come with shallow breathing. And so I think that the proper breathing techniques, making sure we're breathing deeply and frequently, it helps us to process that information. Maybe not process it all right away, but it helps us just to kind of take in that moment and be prepared to process the information. So I think that a breathing piece is absolutely huge, and oftentimes we can immediately, because matter of fact, this happened to me not too long ago, where I was actually doing a LinkedIn audio event, and someone came to the stage and shared their thoughts, and it completely caught me out of left field, because I was so accustomed to my conversations going a certain way, and up to this point, I had not had a single issue. And I've been doing the audio events, uh, excuse me, consistently for about 3 months with no issue. And so this particular day, someone came in, and again, seemingly coming from me, at least, feeling like they came from left field. I didn't even know how to respond to what they said, because again, I had been married to the outcomes that I had been receiving for so long. Again, doing the LinkedIn audio events for about 3 months at that time, and so the individual came in and shared what they shared, and I was just like, and earlier, later on in the conversation, I came back and I was just like, what just happened? I was really, this is a true story. I was just kind of taken back, and I felt like I wanted to retire at that moment, because I was just so taken back, and because I had not expected the conversation to go that way. And so here I was feeling like I was having to play makeup and get the conversation back on track, not have to keep digging into that stuff that was put out there. And so it can definitely put us through, or send us through a loop, if you will, if we're just not prepared to expect different outcomes than what we're focused on. So I think that's an
Right.
excellent point, Helen.
Thank you. So I want to build on what you were saying, because I wrote it down. That, so far, as far as like my perspective of what I've been speaking in, I've been speaking and adapting to just change. It's different than what you expected, but not necessarily whether it's a positive or a negative change.
Right.
And I think you really just kind of highlighted adapting to where it's a negative change. It's an undesired thing that's
Sure.
happening. And so where I kind of go to with that, I had this little saying that I say to my clients: what other people say and do is always a reflection of them, not you.
Yeah.
And like, that's immediately where I went to when you're talking about your audio event and somebody coming in and saying whatever, like that was a reflection of that person,
Right.
of them in that moment, and
Right.
however they were taking in that information, and it was causing certain things in them to
Yeah.
stir. And so they were reacting out of what was getting stirred up in them, and they were
Right.
projecting it back onto you rather than them being able to own, hey, I have a problem. I have
Yeah.
an issue. I have something
Mm.
going on with me. And instead they're they're
Right.
coming at
Right.
you like you're the problem. So I think that's a huge thing I want people to keep in mind,
Mm.
because sometimes you can have that disruptor. You can have that person who's just out there causing problems because they can. Like
Yeah. Absolutely.
there's nothing else to it.
Yeah.
And so I think when people are able to stay in that mindset of, okay, if this disruptor is coming at you, it's never about you.
Yeah.
It's about that other person and whatever they have going on in that moment. And if
Mhm.
you can stop and pause and just say, hey, why don't you tell me what's going on with you right now?
Helen, that would have been perfect. Absolutely, that would have been perfect, Helen. Uh, and I think that probably is what I probably should have done. But again, I was just caught off guard because everyone was just like, "Oh, the room's just so great, Curtis." Blah 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 blah. Just and I was like, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." And I, definitely wasn't. I don't think I was getting a big head about it, but I I enjoyed presenting those conversations or people
What I've been speaking in, um, I've been speaking and adapting to just change. It's different than what you expected, but
yeah,
not necessarily whether it's a positive or a negative
right,
change. And I think you really just kind of highlighted adapting to where it's a negative change. It's an undesired thing that's
sure,
happening. And so where I kind of go to with that, I had this little saying that I say to my clients: what other people say and do is always a reflection of them, not you.
mm, yeah,
And like that's immediately where I went to when you're talking about your audio event and somebody coming in and saying whatever, like that was a reflection of that person,
Right.
of them in that moment, and
Right.
however they were taking in that information, and it was causing certain things in them to
Yeah.
stir. And so they were reactive of what was up in them, and they were
Right.
projecting it back onto you rather than them being able to own, hey, I have a problem. I have an
Yeah.
issue. I have something
Mhm.
going on with me. And instead they're they're
Right.
coming at
Right.
you like you're the problem. So I think that's a huge thing I want people to keep in mind,
Mhm.
because sometimes you can have that disruptor. You can have that person who's just out there causing problems because they can. Like
Yeah. Absolutely.
there's nothing else to it.
Yeah.
And so I think when people are able to stay in that mindset of, okay, if this disruptor is coming at you, it's never about you.
Yeah.
It's about that other person and whatever they have going on in that moment. And if
Mhm.
you can stop and pause and just say, hey, why don't you tell me what's going on with you right now?
Helen, that would have been perfect. Absolutely. That would have been perfect, Helen. Uh, and I think that probably is what I probably should have done. But again, I was just caught off guard because everyone was just like, "Oh, the room's just so great, Curtis." Blah 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 blah. Just and I was like, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." And I, definitely wasn't. I don't think I was getting a big head about it, but I I enjoyed presenting those conversations, or people, they were getting something out of those conversations, having being able to voice their own opinions and things of that nature. And so, but at this time, it just kind of just threw me off, and I absolutely need to say what you just shared, because I think at some part of it, I did take it personal, and it wasn't my intention, but it caught me off guard, because it's like, well, wait a minute now, everyone is saying my rooms are nice. What's your problem? So that's where I was at with that. So I appreciate that. So I will definitely
Yeah.
slow down and make sure that I'm not so mirrored to the outcome, and be prepared to uh, uh, be on guard, if you will.
Right. I don't necessarily want you to be on guard, because I think that'll take away from your presentation as well. You know, but I think if you can just have that tucked away in the back of your head,
Sure,
should
sure.
anything similar like that happen again, then
Right, right,
that's an
right,
approach that you can take.
right.
So yeah, I want you to be you. I think you show up very authentically and
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah. Well,
But
sometimes it just one person. Sometimes, that one person tries to, you know, steer the ship in a different direction. So
no, I get it. I get it. But it's about them. It is not about you. It's about
absolutely,
them.
absolutely, 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 absolutely.
So some other things kind of popped up into my head in regards to adapting. And then I was kind of thinking, of like life adaptations. So we
Hmm.
have, the aspect of, you're a child and you adapt into adulthood, and you
Sure.
adapt into, relationships, you adapt into children, you adapt into work, you're like all these other things.
Mhm.
And then where I was really kind of settling in on is people adapting to retirement,
Mm.
because that is such a big struggle for
Yeah, that's
people.
interesting, Helen. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
'Cause I think I've seen people adapt better to
Mm.
marriage and children than I've seen them adapt to retirement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mm.
So I think it's because we spend so much of our lives defining ourselves by what we do. If you think about how many times you are introduced to someone, or you're just getting to know someone, that's like the top 5 questions that you ask. So what do you do?
Yeah.
And it's such a part of our personality and how we view ourselves, that we don't really spend much time thinking about, well, how do you want to view yourself when that's no longer a part of
Mm.
your life? So adapting to that, adapting to, well, who am I outside of work? I can't say that I'm a VP. I can't say that,
Mm.
I'm this artist. I can't say that I'm this or whatever. And I think it's really important for people to kind of think about some of those big lifetime changes that are eventually going to happen. Um, and really kind of think in terms of, okay, how do I pivot? Once again, how do I shift and see myself outside of just what I do, and that being the only way that they define themselves. And a lot of times, I'm talking to retirees in terms of establishing new goals. Their goals before used to be so very much work related, whether it's making a certain amount of money, whether it's, completing this project, whether it's, making certain connections. Like everything was so very connected to work, and they never really thought of goals
Mm.
outside of that. So I think that's another adapting point of life that I think is under talked about. People don't talk enough
Absolutely.
about that.
Absolutely, Helen. Yeah, as I'm getting older, different thoughts that I, definitely wouldn't have had maybe 10, 15 years ago. I would not have had those thoughts, but as I'm getting older, and even just adapting to the space of I'm a stay-at-home dad. And so I've had to adapt. So I love what you're sharing there. It's because I've had to adapt to the fact that, hey, my wife is working, she's holding it down, and I've had to adapt my own thinking. Well, wait a minute, I'm a man. I'm supposed to be out there working and bringing in the bread and all those things, different things, and not to imply that she should be doing something else, but just having to adapt to those changes. Because commonly that's typically that's what we're supposed to be doing as men, and just having to take on uh, different goals now, you know, or finding something else to do. Because I think, and every once in a while, it absolutely does creep back up on me, because I think by nature, this is just what we've been, geared or told to do, and I've been doing it for so long. And so every once in a while, it does try to creep up, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not doing anything. I'm not working. I don't have a title. So I mean, as a men's life coach, that's great too, but not bringing in necessarily the bulk of income. And I think for us as men, again, having to adapt to that that thinking is it can be challenging, because again, as I said moments ago, I find myself say, wait a minute, things have been real quiet around here. And just having to uh, even make sure I'm breathing properly, because sometimes when I think about certain things. So wait a minute, I'm not feeling that I'm not where I would like to be. The anxiety comes up sometimes, tries to come up, and I find myself even acting out of character, and my wife has to remind me, babe, hold on, slow down. And I mean, it's a real thing. So I appreciate what you're saying, because I think it's more so now you have more men who are at home, and so it is definitely a transition and adapting that we as men have to make, and making sure that we're not uh, placing a major burden on our wives, our significant other, or even our kids, because we're having challenges adapting to this situation, or a new situation.
Right, right. So going a little bit deeper, because I'm just for a second there, I'm listening to you, and I'm also putting myself in the place of, listeners out there, because they're
Mhm.
like, okay, you guys are talking about this, but you're not telling us what to
Right, right.
do. So my suggestion to you is, when it comes to adapting, it's not about the external, it's about the internal.
Mhm.
It's about checking in with you as to what's coming up with you and for you,
Right.
because this has shifted, and you being able to focus on, well, what do you do with that? Because I'm always talking to people in regards to your emotions serve the same purpose as your five senses. You
Mm.
see, hear, taste, touch, smell. And those five senses give you feedback about your environment, and your emotions give you feedback about your environment
Right.
that you can't see. You only experience those pieces of your environment. You don't necessarily see them, touch them, that sort of
Right.
thing. And so being able to tune in to what exactly those emotions are trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you there's something within this that needs to change. And most of the time it's within you. It's
Absolutely.
not
Absolutely.
it's not that everybody else or the situation. Yeah, you cannot like the situation, but there are also certain unpleasant situations in life we just have to get through. You know,
Absolutely.
we can't stop them, we can't reverse them. Okay.
Yeah.
All we can do is move forward. And so the I guess the answer to, adaptability and how you become adaptable is to tune into yourself
Yeah.
and really pay attention to what's coming up for you, why it's coming up for you, what is it trying to tell you about you.
Hmm.
Because this may be something that you need to work on, you need to grow. Like, you may need to just be able to accept, okay, it doesn't work like that, not at this particular junction. you know I
Yeah.
think if you stay focused on you and what you can do to help yourself, it prevents you from then attacking other people and wanting to control other people, because
Yeah.
that's another aspect of the anxiety. Like, people get
Absolutely.
so anxious about it, they want to control everyone.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's coming
Absolutely.
back to you.
Yeah. Absolutely, Helen. That's a powerful piece there, in regards to just knowing what to do, or at least what to pay attention to, and excuse me. And as we pay attention, as you mentioned, as we pay attention to those emotions, the things that we can't necessarily see, but we can feel them. It is a part of us. This adaptability is having to be honest with ourselves.
Right.
And in most cases, as Helen mentioned, it really is not about the other person. And I think a life in itself, I think I said this some time ago, several episodes ago, is that I think life presents to us relationships in all kinds of different levels, whether you're married or a long-term relationship, or been on a job for a certain time, or just good friends, whatever. People will bring out stuff in us, and as they're bringing out these different things in us, and I think it's just why relationships are so important, because I think that it's more just in relating to people, but it's relating relationships on a higher call, if you will. And when those relationships are on a higher call, I think a lot of the things that we're dealing with that are being pulled out of us, and sometimes that can make us angry, or make us think it's the other person, when in fact, just like Helen said, in most cases, a good chance it's probably us, because when we're having those certain feelings about adapting, or whatever the situation might be, rest assured the feelings are going to come up. You can't touch them, but they're there. You're feeling them, and so we're going to feel all kinds of different ways. And it's a good chance that what you might be sharing with the other person, especially if you're pointing a finger at the other person, it could be distorted. It could be just us acting out of our being uncomfortable. So we absolutely have to pay attention to those feelings, and so that's a major piece. And I think the other piece of it, as you mentioned earlier, is that sometimes anxiety comes with it, and making sure that we're breathing deeply and often, because anxiety hangs out in those shallow breaths, and we can find ourselves just not only in that shallow place of breathing, but saying some things that we should not be saying to our kids, to our spouse, significant other, whatever the case might be, or going off on a colleague as a leader, or going off on one of your subordinates. And we just have to be quick to check ourselves first. And that can be a challenge in itself. But this is all part of going through the process, and making sure that there's a checks and balances. And I think as I said in a conversation not too long ago, uh, the different things that we're unwilling to deal with, that show up privately sometimes. Maybe they're pointed out to someone in a past relationship, or something that uh, maybe at home, or something, again, a private situation. And oftentimes, if we're not ready to deal with those private situations, or choosing not to deal with those things in a private, things that come up privately, uh, they can unfortunately expose us in a public place, and we can find ourselves in a really bad place because we are reluctant to deal with a situation when it was presented to us in private.
Right. And then you really have to adapt.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, 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 absolutely.
So no,
Mhm.
thank you, Curtis, for all of that. Those are definitely a lot of words of wisdom that I hope everyone takes, into consideration. But that is our time for tonight. I appreciate
Oh, I thought
everyone
you were
who's
going to share
tuned.
something else, but yeah, that's okay.
No, I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh, I gotta wrap it up. No, that is our time for tonight. And I think this was a wonderful, great conversation in
Yeah,
all the different places that, we kind of went to. And I definitely hope this is going to be a help and a blessing to someone out there who is listening and may need to hear this.
absolutely.
All right. So good night, and we'll see you next time.
All right, ciao for now. Bye bye.